So who's going to join me on this lecture today? I always seem to pick on Keith. Sue, you've been elected.
Oh.
Unless you don't want to assist me in this lecture. And who else am I going to choose? I tell you what, Rosamond.
Oh, I was keeping quiet there. Look, Jim looks like he wants to do it.
Okay, then we'll choose Karen.
Okay.
So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to mute everybody.
Bye bye.
See you guys later. And I'm gonna mute Jim and Ellen. No, I'm not gonna mute. You're staying with me, Karen. Mute this young man, and there you go. And right, so those that are left with me are Karen and Sue. Is that correct?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay, so let's really get into it. And if I do this, and right, that's a good start. So what are you seeing now at this minute, wonderful Sue?
A map of Denmark, is it?
Well, sort of close, yeah. A map of, well, I don't think the Germans would like you calling Germany Denmark. I do not think that's a good start. So, but what I'd really like to start off with, I'd like a little bit of a discussion with you two, actually, Sue and Karen. If I mentioned Varus, if I mentioned the Teutoburger forest, if I mentioned the Teutoburg forest, and I mentioned 9 AD, what does that conjure up in your mind, you two? You can speak at the same time, it's fine.
Romans.
Go on, Sue.
Yes. Marching.
Romans.
Yeah. Yeah.
No,
Roman battle.
No, this isn't a game of snap. One says Romans, and the other one eventually says it. No, right. So, does it spring to mind an absolute disaster for the Roman Empire?
I know nothing.
No, I don't know.
Right, okay.
We're just guessing it's a Roman battle.
Right, or something very along those lines. Well, that's a good start. We know it took place in the heart of modern-day Germany. So obviously, give you an idea where we are. Berlin's all the way over here in the east. You've got Denmark in the north, as you mentioned, the Netherlands, obviously, France down here. So it's, when I say in the middle of Germany, you sort of get the idea where I'm talking about. For us guys, it is. So the last time I gave this lecture, I had no images like this. I just stood in a room and I just told people about the battle. And I remember one person after that lecture saying to me, it's the best lecture they've ever been to. And a year or so later, that person died. She had cancer, and so this in tribute to Jean, this lecture. And she absolutely loved this lecture because she loved the Romans. She liked the Germanic input and so on. But as we go through the lecture, it springs to mind that there's something not quite right about the campaign. It's almost as if the Romans are one of the greatest military machines on the planet, and within 3 days, 3 Roman legions of over 22,000 men are wiped out. Very, very few survivors, and this is akin to the Battle of Isandlwana. If anyone knows anything about the Battle of Isandlwana that took place in 1879, only about 30-odd British soldiers survived out of a contingent of around 1,600 at Isandlwana in Zululand in South Africa way, and the British Army was completely annihilated, right? And that was in an open field situation. It was one of the worst defeats in British military history. This in AD 9, as a comparison, was one of the worst defeats the Roman army had ever suffered. It was far greater than what they suffered at the hands of Spartacus 90 odd years earlier. It was an absolute disaster. And the name Varus is immortalized there. Varus, the display of Varus and the Varus disaster. This is, and to try and get a grip on the understanding of the field of sight is that we do have now, since 1987, a great deal of archaeological evidence. When I've been doing my my other lectures, you know, we do the Saturday where we look at ghosts and myths and legends. I mentioned battle sites now and again, and the question is, where's the evidence? And it's like, you know, we got a little bit here and there. And last night we actually had, as part of the archaeology and history of Cymru, we looked at 3 battles, and only one of them we had lots of archaeological evidence. The other 2 we didn't. This is definitely akin to when you go to Waterloo. It's full of archaeology. It's full of archaeological evidence. And lots of the archaeological evidence is there because it was just, you kill a Roman, just leave him there with his coins, with his sword, everything. We just leave him there because 22,000 soldiers is a lot of armor, is a lot of supplies. And again, the metaphor should be seen with Islandwana. Again, you're all familiar with that. After the Battle of Islandwana, lots of the rifles, lots of the munitions were just left at the field at Islandwana by the Zulu, because there was just so much of it. And the same can be said about this landscape. So the Roman-Germanic battle that became fake news. The reason why we're calling it fake news is people didn't believe that 3 Roman legions could be annihilated. For years and years and years, as people sought in woodlands, fields for this battle of Teutoburg Forest, there was no evidence. People thought it was just made up. It was fictitious. Varus somehow walked into the woodland and lost 3 legions, and that was it. But from 1987, they started finding real archaeological evidence. If anyone knows the German landscape, and I think Goff is one of those that does, there's a place called Kalkreis, and which I'm pronouncing completely wrong. At Kalkreis, which is within the heart of the Teutoburg Forest, they've opened a museum, and it's a wonderful museum. It's like the experience that Keith has when he goes to Waterloo. It's full of archaeology. And this itself here is a star piece of the exhibition. This is a reconstruction, but the original is there, of an iron base, silver coated parade helmet. Now, the parade helmets are really rare, and they would have been usually used when soldiers are on parade, but sometimes they were used in battle. And those that love the film Gladiator will see a scene where Russell Crowe is actually wearing a mask similar to this in the gladiatorial arena. It was there to try and shock rather than to protect. So if you're wearing something like this, you can't see on the left or the right. You can only see in front. And a perfect example of this was actually found at the site that we're talking about. So here we go. This is a nice headline here: Unearthing the Mystery of the Battle that Created Germany. Archaeologists have launched a new drive to explore an ancient German-Roman battlefield. Nationalists spun the carnage into myth about Germany's birth. This is the moment where the Germans completely destroy the Roman army, three Roman legions. But it's in a way not the birth of the German state. And even Arminius, who was the leader of the Germans, was actually renamed by later German writers as Hermann the Victorious, because Germany, it's true to say, has had many events in history that it's been truly victorious. within a small period of time, things fall apart. The 21-day conquest of France, which was not achievable in the First World War after 5 years, 20-day conquest of France in the Second World War, and everything goes to pot after that, and you know what we're talking about. We also talk about the fact the Battle of Leipzig, where the Germans, the Prussians, destroy an army of Napoleon. And again, if things fall apart again, this is another example of history in AD 9, where almost the Germans for a moment are unified and it all falls apart again. This is typical Germany. And I think that's unfair, and I think it's fair at the same time. So a little bit of text in front of you. That's the mask that we're going to look at. 25 years of archaeology at KARL-JAMES. It was in 1987, an amateur archaeologist, Tony Clun, found some coins, some really interesting coins. These were gold coins. When you go metal detecting, I don't go metal detecting, I'm an archaeologist, you know my views on that and so on. But if you ever find any gold coins, it's truly a rare thing indeed. Gold coins are not huge coins. These coins that this amateur found were between the size of a modern 5 and a 10 pence piece, probably just under the size of the old 5 pence piece. Really, really nice gold coins. So we found these, and these were associated with the Emperor Augustus. Why should these coins be there? In the forest? They could have been lost because by any Roman, because the story, as we know, is that over time the Romans marched into where modern day Germany is and conquered areas of it, and these could have been dropped by any Roman. But in 1988, we find 3 nice catapult lead stones. You could refer to them as you could refer to them as bullets as well. Catapult lead stones. They were probably more slinger stones than slinger lead stones. Basically, sort of nice, sort of little pellet things, which we'll show an image of. And these were found there, 3 of them. Why were they there? There's a little bit more than the coins. And the archaeologists started to realize that there was a lot more going on with this land than they actually thought. And it soon became evident that this was a place of, this may be the place of the great disaster that unfolded. By 1990, they're finding earthworks, and we know from various descriptions that Arminius, the leader of the Germanic peoples at that time, built a defensive structure to channel the Romans into the direction he wished to channel them, so he could channel them into a killing ground. But then it was slowly thought that this might actually be a rampart that could in fact be associated with the Romans making a last-ditch attempt. There's no pun there because there was a ditch associated with it. A last-ditch attempt at making a defensive work to defend their soldiers whilst they were being constantly attacked. Now, this was a disaster that unfolded over 3 days, 3-4 days. And there was various artifacts found there, various different debris and so on, and military equipment. But whatever this marks, it marks a change and a shift in the understanding of what this was. It's no longer a historical footnote, it's an archaeological footnote. And then they found what you can see there. We got another bigger image. I'm still going by the text in front of me. A cavalry mask, a Roman cavalry helmet mask. This itself was in a fairly good state of preservation. It was corroded from behind because it was on an iron base. But after they cleaned it up, it looked quite spectacular. And the image that you can actually see behind me is actually these. Now, what I'm going to do, it gets a little bit confusing from this point. And the reason why it gets a little bit confusing from this point is that it needs a little bit more explanation from what the text says. So try not to read the text. Let me interpret what we're seeing. They found several sets of ditches. which is rather interesting. And the first sets of ditches associated with sort of the rampart, or what they're seeing there. More than one rampart, one built by Arminius, another one built by Varus's soldiers. They started finding a series of pits, and we know by the Roman writer Tacitus, who's actually writing a little bit after these events, may I add, that he writes that in AD 16, when the Roman armies marched back into that landscape, they found a great deal of carnage. 7 years after the events, many unburied Roman soldiers, many unburied Germanic soldiers, and they all happen to be male. Now that's rather important to this. It's rather important, and we'll go on to the significance of that statement in a moment. But there was 2 sets of pits that they actually found, and one set of pits is associated with Tacitus writing that the Roman army, as it managed to get there by AD 16, they actually reburied lots of their fallen comrades. They reburied them in large pits because they had no choice. And there's descriptions of other pits being dug by the Germanic tribesmen to crucify the Romans, to stake them alive, to flail them alive, all these different things that we'll go on to. And in the course of these examinations, obviously finding more ramparts, a surprising intact mule that we'll talk about in a short while. The animal had broken its neck, and shortly after its deadly fall was buried under parts of the rampart, as the rampart had sort of collapsed. All these different interpretations. And then they found 2 more pits in front of the ramparts, and these were examined, and underneath these pits they found older pits, and these older pits are really important to try and get an idea of what we're talking about. The one set of ramparts established by Arminius and the German tribes, as we've mentioned, was to funnel the Romans into a sort of hidden dell, and in front of that rampart there were large pits, and these large pits contained large sharp stakes. And the idea is that as the Roman army would push itself forward and be caught in a bottleneck, some of the Roman soldiers would push their comrades into these pits, and then they would be impaled on these spikes. And then we start to get evidence. And in these pits, you find various artifacts and various other information. And the image of the skull that you actually see behind me, and the one that you've actually just seen, just quickly, we'll look at this in a little bit more detail. So they're still excavating there today. And just a tiny little bit more off this text in front of us, before we really start to get more into this. They're still excavating there, obviously not this year, but they're still excavating there. And the various questions is that what was the landscape exactly like? Was it heavily wooded? Which I believe it was, personally. Were there open spaces that they funneled the Romans into? Another question is, how dense was the Germanic population? How wide was the trackway that they used into the large forest? I like to refer to it more of as a woodland, actually, because it would have been, when you think about forest, you think about conifers. It was more of a deciduous mixed a woodland forest, so with really thick trunks of trees, so thick trunks you could hide 2 or 3 men behind them. That's what we're talking about. If you go to the forest today, and we'll ask Goff or anyone who's been to Germany if they've been to the Teutoburg forest and what the trees look like today, the trees back then would have been those old worldy trees that you could hide a whole army behind, basically. And what happened to the spoils of war? Lots of the spoils of war were left behind because there was so much of the spoils of war And there's only so much you can take away with you. So hopefully we're looking at the mule. Now this is a rather interesting image. This is a mule that had landed in one of those big pits. And what are your first thoughts about this, Sue, with what I've already said, this image?
Well, I'm just looking at his neck to see where the break is, and
It's difficult to make out.
yeah, difficult to make out. Yes, you can see it's a mule, but there's not a lot of clarity for me.
Okay, that's nice. And there's something more obvious that I would like to ask Karen if she can see what the obvious thing is, and it's not to do with the bones. You see it, Karen?
No.
Right, actually, you know what I talked about in those pits? There were sharp spikes.
Oh, the holes. The holes there.
So what's basically happened is the mule's been pushed aside and has
Oh,
been
lovely.
impaled on these sharp spikes.
Oh,
Oh,
So
poor little mule.
So the sense of breaking its neck, when you think about it, this animal would be in so much pain. Look at where those spikes have gone through, even dislodging its spine. So it would have been in absolute agony. And hopefully, he broke his neck as he fell into the pit. If he didn't, then that's very painful. But you don't often think about the animal context. Obviously, this is a question for Keith to write down, and we'll ask him after the break. Before the break, and is the context of when we think about animals really discussed at Waterloo, for example? We don't, when we looked at, for example, the other week at Napoleon's retreat from Moscow, we talk about the hundreds of thousands of people on both sides dying. But very few people come up with the numbers of horses and cattle and all the rest of it dying in these campaigns. I know Keith did a little bit of research for me. He said that out of the 180,000 horses that went to campaign with Napoleon, only 1,000 returned. 180,000, 1,000 returned. That's not even 1%, right? So nobody talks about the tragedy of these animals. And for once, we're actually seeing the true tragedy of these animals. And I think this is a fair image to be looking at, to be honest with you. Now, lots can be said. And it's always good with the archaeology to bring in the history and try to meld the history into one. So Leipzig, Hermann, cutting the chains of control over Germany. Here he is, Hermann, releasing the Germans again. And people started to believe Hermann is the archetypal Arminius. And you can see quite clearly there that you've got a broken Roman standard, which Signifer would have held. And you can see that this is, Hermann is trampling on the Romans. And to be honest with you, when you build up something like this, people have a habit of not believing it. Were Varus's legion? The Germans are obviously making these things up. And there's another fault in the German mindset. And the fault in the German mindset is they always doubt their ability. Nobody believed Adolf Hitler when he said, I'm going to invade France and I'm going to conquer it in days, and he did, right? And that becomes a bit of a myth then. It wasn't Adolf Hitler responsible for this, it was somebody else, and then I think the invasion of France in 100 years' time will become a bit of a myth, because it's almost as if it's not possible, right? It's also not possible that the Germans defeated Napoleon. It's also not possible that the Germans defeated the Romans, but they actually did. And unfortunately, in the German mindset, they have a habit of fantasizing when, if they looked at the facts of what exactly happened, it becomes more real, because these are real events. And I don't know if this is fair, and Goff can come back at me. I don't know if this is fair, but this is what I feel when I look at this lecture. But there is another key to the fantasizing. When we learn about the archaeology, there's still this unreality. Archaeologists make very bad military historians, very bad military historians. The reason why I'm saying that is that we don't look at the terrain enough. This is the Teutoburg forest. These are really thick trees. You don't see thick trees there, right? These are really dense trees. And it's a really tight, narrow trackway that Arminius is forcing the Romans to be strung out. This is an army of 22,000 men strung out over several miles, right? So you can pick them off. They're unable to maneuver. If the Romans had an opening like this, right, they would have been able to survive the campaign. So vis-a-vis, the facts tell us that it was nothing like this image. It was really thick, dense trees. And there's another key to this. And I don't think we really understand what I'm just about to say. We don't have many bones surviving of Germanic tribesmen. Is it because some of the bones in the ground have been misinterpreted? Because the Romans had lots of auxiliaries fighting with them, so they wouldn't genetically be identified as from Spain or Italy or something like that. So, you know, it's going to be difficult to identify who's who when you find them, unless you have here lies Bigus Dickus or something. You know, you're not going to get that. So I think what's happening is that the Romans are marching, they're unable to get into formation, and what's happening, the Germans are just chucking rocks at them. They're chucking spears at them, right? Their projectiles are landing on them over and over again, over and over again. It's like a torrent for hour after hour, day after day, and eventually that's going to wear you down. You're going to be weak and you're going to die, right? And another thing that we look at in our notes as well is about the archaeologists, my fellow archaeologists, say that the Roman soldiers, in their panic, decided to bury their coins, thinking that they're going to go back for it. Well, no, I'm sorry. They didn't bury their coins. They just discarded their coins. They took off their armor and they wanted to fight more. You know, there's so much of what you can learn from the landscape that helps you understand the battle a lot more. These are those look like coprolites from a dinosaur. I got to be honest with you. These are, you can describe them as slinger bullets. You can refer to them as catapult, a lead shot, or however you'd like them. But these are just dropped there. They're unused. They're just dropped there. And the thing is, when you're in a tight corridor, probably no wider than your corridor in the house. Well, slightly a bit wider than that, but maybe your average corridor in your house, right? That's as wide as the Roman army marched through. That's all you've got. And you're unable, I got a bit of a sling here. You're unable to sling this and to get things out because the trees are so dense. Anything that you throw out, your archers, the arrows are going to just bounce back in on you, right? This is a hell situation. And then that leads the question. The question has it that are the events that the archaeologists are learning, are the events of history, why was this an absolute military disaster? This was a complete military disaster, absolute incompetence. And you could say the same incompetence that we see at Adawa when the Italians invaded Ethiopia. You could say the same idiocy that you see General Custer as he goes in with the cavalry against a few thousand native tribes people. You know, the absolute idiocy. But this is idiocy beyond Islandoana. This is idiocy on another page. But to actually try and get into the mindsets of these Germans, and I'm going to definitely do this before the break, we've got to go somewhere else. We've got to do a little bit of a comparison. Now, this skull itself is from a site, and I'm glad Sue had no idea of her geography when she looked at that map. She mentioned Denmark, and this is a skull from a site in Denmark, over 330 odd miles away from Kalkari's Teutoburg Forest up north, right? This is another site. And this site that they were excavating in Denmark, they actually found a load of skulls of individuals from a pre-Roman period. In other words, a few years before 9 AD, they find lots of evidence of people in peat bogs or people buried in fields. They all turn out to be men, and they've got injuries on them. And that gives you a clue to what's going on in the Teutoburg Forest. What's going on in the Teutoburg Forest is that the Germans are treating the Romans as if they're Germans. Now, that's really important, because if a Roman surrenders to a German, he's going to be butchered, but the Roman doesn't know that. And the point is that when the Roman commanders were surrendering in the Teutoburg Forest, they were shown no mercy. They were crucified. Terrible things happened to them. We've got some evidence of that in the bodies that were found by Germanicus as he marched with his legions into the Teutoburg Forest. And if that name Germanicus actually rings a bell, this is the same guy who's the father of Caligula. Anyway, moving on. So we've got this skull, and the point being made is that it's that sense of when you march into native landscapes, you are to use their rules of combat. As the poor soldiers found at Islandowana, those British soldiers that surrendered were crucified. They were burnt alive. They had their anatomies cut off. Their tongues, terrible things happened to their eyes poked out, all these terrible things, as Chelmsford found hours after the battle, as he managed to get his relief force to the battlefield after everyone was dead. And he was surprised by this, but the Zulu, you're fighting in Zulu, you're not fighting on British terms, and you're not fighting on Roman terms either. Hang on 1 second. We got that right. We'll go right. Okay. This mask is out of sequence, but it's out of sequence. It doesn't matter. This is the mask that you saw earlier on. This is the large reconstructed mask, the one you saw earlier on as part of the exhibition. This is a parade helmet, and I know some of you like me to mention sort of local things occasionally, and we're going to do that, folks. In the 1800s. Around Ogmore Castle, at the back of Ogmore Farm, owned by Rob Williams, if you know him. He's the guy who runs the stables there, good friend of mine. Back in the 1800s, they found 2 parade helmets like this. And they're very rare finding parade helmets in Britain, and they found them there, and it was all likely that they were silver. Unfortunately, they disappeared, like many artifacts. But we do know that from antiquarian reports at the time that we found a couple of those in the 1800s by Ogmore Castle, and they would have looked like this. And I do believe there's another example of a parade helmet being found in the Vale of Glamorgan as well, but that also disappeared. This itself is, you can see that this is the restored version, not the reconstructed version, the restored version. This is the actual artifact. You can see you can see the where the cavalryman, the Ayla, would have looked out. Very poor maneuverability, and you know, a Germanic tribesman would have probably been able to jump on his horse before he even knew he was there, stabbed him in the back, and this face guard would have been of no assistance at all. And if anyone actually says wear a mask on a bus, don't wear something like this, Sue, okay?
Thank you. Good advice.
Yeah, I think that is good advice. It comes into that woman who gets on a bus in London who's told to wear a face mask, and she's wearing one of Boris Johnson. So anyway, back to this now, just a little bit. This is about that site, you know, in Denmark, to give you a little bit of an idea about how the Germans are treating the Romans, and you know, the type of things that they're actually finding at Calgary's. And why is it this color? It's been in sort of peaty conditions, not in a perfect peat bog, and that's basically colored it a little bit. And you know that in real extreme peat bogs, this would have turned to nothing. So it's not the same type of peat bogs that we're looking at with peat marsh, but sort of similar type of terrain. And when we have human skulls that are bleached white, completely bleached white, in fact, so white, it's likely that those bones have been in a situation where they've been burnt. If they're an off-color white, like a grey white, it's not a grey white, sort of an off-color white, like a creamy type of white. They mean that they've been exposed out in the open. You know, somebody's been digging those bones up and they've been out in the open. Those are types of things that Germanicus's legionaries would have found in AD 16. And if you see sort of bones that have sort of a deep sort of a yellowy color, it means they've been buried. So there are different ways of looking at bones, but these are definitely sort of from a peat bog environment. So reading on this, rather we'll sort of recap a little bit here, and then then it takes us into this bit at the bottom. So obviously in the days of Rome, it was never a good idea to send amateurs to pacify the Germanic tribes. It's said that the three legions, the legion of the 17th, the 18th, and the 19th, led by Varus, were amateurs. I don't believe that they were, but they were led by they weren't amateurs. I believe that they were probably well-trained Roman legionaries led by an absolute idiot known as Varus. Varus was a friend of Augustus, and it was seen as an administrator. Varus could sort of flex his wings and prove how wonderful he was. But in 3 days, he proved how much of an idiot he was. But is that all the story? Can we blame it all on Varus? And I don't think we can. Anyway, but historians do. When we look at what Tacitus is saying, he's talking about the bleached bones, scattered bones, bones in little heaps, hard by lay splintered spears, and limbs of horses. All these things sort of hacked apart. Human skulls. Now this is a clincher. As Tacitus writes, were nailed prominently on the tree trunks. There were gibbets and torture pits for the prisoners. So in other words, what we're seeing that this is no normal battlefield, but this is any native battlefield. This is what you expect. And to be honest with you, right, if you want to do a bit of a comparison, if you want to vilify the Germans, let's vilify the Romans for a little bit. Let's look at what they did to all those rebels as part of Spartacus's revolt. Spartacus's revolt, just over 80 odd years earlier, 6,000 of them were nailed to crosses. 6,000 were nailed to crosses. And if we want to do a comparison, the Roman world and the German world, they're equally they're equally horrible people, if you want to put it that way. There's no heroes on the German side. There's no heroes on the Roman side. These are both vilified people. So I'm not going to take any sides. I'm not going to take any prisoners here. Gibbets and torture pits for prisoners. So in other words, after the battle, right, anyone who had surrendered was tortured to death, partially hung, hung, drawing and quartering, all these things, having their chests sliced open, their bones deliberately broken whilst they're in absolute agony, their eyes being poked out, all these things, all this type of evidence. But then again, the Romans have got their gladiatorial competitions equally heinous. In the neighboring groves stood the savage altars at which they had slaughtered the tribunes and chief centurions. So there are no prisoners taken. Varus had fallen on his sword, and it's said that he'd fallen on his sword before he was captured. He was then hung, and then his body was burnt. His head decapitated, and sent as a gift to another German king. Now, if any of you are actually thinking any of this is familiar, think about the bog bodies. When we talked about the bog bodies, we talked about ritualistic death. We talked about after somebody's died, right? You ritualistically crucify them, you ritualistically hang them, you ritualistically stab them. This is all being done to these Romans. So then you could argue how many of these centurions were still alive when things were being done to them. Scattered archaeological evidence has long suggested that the warriors of ancient Germania were not kind-hearted in victory. But new evidence suggests just how grisly things were at the time of Christ, when an aggressive and well-organized young Roman Empire was trying, ultimately unsuccessfully, to subdue the equally aggressive inhabitants of Germania, which is a good way of putting it. Germania was the name given by the Romans to Germany. A Danish team working in a bog about 325 miles north of the site of the Roman massacre is analysing the recently excavated remains of 40 men, believed to be part of a contingent of 200, whose bodies were apparently hacked to bits and thrown into the shallows of Lake Moso after a battle that took place between German rivals, probably a few years before the Varus massacre. So this is unknown. You march into German territory, you expect this fate. Germans against Germans, not a good thing. This is in the Anken Bog, lying today beside a lakeside meadow in Denmark. These finds added to artifacts from other sites and the writings of ancient Romans are supplying insights into a warlord culture. Fiercely egalitarian German tribes that fought constantly, routinely, slaughtered their enemies and offered their bodies and their weapons to their gods. Now, the reason why I said earlier on about the Germans defeating the Romans, 3 Roman legions, whilst another 9 Roman legions had gone south to the Balkans. There were in total, I think about 10 Roman legions on the Germanic Roman frontier. 7 went south to subdue the people of the Balkans, and then 3 remained behind with Varus. And the point I was trying to make was that after this great victory that of the Germans over the Romans, Arminius, the great victor of that, was killed himself by his own people. What I mean is the Germans make so much progress and they throw it all away, right? The remains in the bog are all young males. Well, when you talk about young males, between about 20 and 45, but relatively young, most of them. There is quite a lot of weapon damage on them. And this is very similar to the evidence at Teutoburg Forest. Some were dead already when they were thrown into the lake. We've spoken about that already the other week and this week. Some have signs that animals have gnawed on their bones before they're chucked in the lake itself, the bog. One of the things we were investigating now is whether they all died of battle wounds or were executed after the battle. We suspect both. So this is the way they did things. This is the German way. And I don't want anyone to feel that this is how Germany has been throughout its whole history. Then again, you could say, has Italy been like this throughout all its history? Has Britain been the empire building sadistic bastards that we see in history that they turn out to be? We're not like that anymore. You know, these are different periods in history, but in different ways things can repeat itself. The Danes have been digging peat and finding bones, as we see, for different reason throughout time. This landscape preserves in wet, oxygen-free, anaerobic conditions artifacts for a long period of time. But this is more recently, back in the 1950s and 60s, in the same area, what they started to find was almost Germanic people, but with Roman weapons. And they actually started to find, not only did they have the earlier evidence pre-Varus 9 AD, just German on German contact, they actually started finding in the 1950s and 60s other evidence of conflicts occurring in about the AD 200s. And lots of these individuals were seen to be obviously within the ilk of the Germanic Scandinavian world, but with Roman equipment. But these weren't Romans, and these were found in the bog as well. And the typical thing is that after the period of Varus, lots of things from that battle, lots of things with the Roman world and trading back and forth is being spread across the entire landscape. So, a jaw. And I tell you what, that set of gnashes is a wonderful set of gnashes. It's a lot better than my set of gnashes, right? So if I go swap with that, I'd be very happy. Somebody in their 20s, Ellen can comment that before the break as well on that set of gnashes there. Obviously, somebody was fairly healthy, involved in something, and that's as they're excavating it. So they've left that there so they can map them all and plan it all and so on and so on. And with this saying that this sort of thing, it's sort of dragging in the name Arminius, and we're using terms after about 9 AD of very cosmopolitan, a lot of contact with the Romans, a lot of these, we're talking about mercenaries, we're talking about a lot of interchange, but the Germans, and in lots of ways, the Romans were very unforgiving. And unforgiving rules. Here, the chieftains were all in competition. Arminius saw Varus as a German chieftain. So in other words, you're going to be treated like a German and all your men. And I've used the word all your men. Don't I usually say that there's a lot of women involved in these battles? Well, when it comes to a Roman legion, there wasn't that woman aspect. But on the German side, there was. So there's a little bit of a difference there. And I will make that point about women just at the end of this first half. If you had something, the others wanted it. The war booty was the thing as they attacked each other. The rules of this game were apparently unforgiving. Win and you got the opportunity to fight again. If you lost and you were lucky, your followers simply abandoned you. But if you were not lucky, like perhaps the leader of these people in the bog, you were hacked to bits. Actually, whoever wrote that, I think it was the other way around. If you're abandoned, you were basically hacked to bits and the others just ran away. We've read about these mass sacrifices, and we come across these in a couple of lectures now. But they're now seeing. The point is that the Roman historians wrote about German on German contact. They wrote about the bog bodies. They wrote about large-scale sacrifices, but the Romans didn't really understand what these sacrifices were about. In other words, the sacrifices were about German one-to-one contact, where the Germans defeated one group of people, and as you're defeated, you all deserve to die. In other words, survival of the fittest, or survival of the most idiotic. And again, the question's always, whenever you're looking at people on a battlefield, are they captives? Are they sacrifices? Are they people who have died in battle? Are they being executed? Are we talking about people burnt? All these other things is talking about slavery and people being set free and so on and so on. But the main thing is, this is how the German world worked. And why do you need graves when you can just chuck people in a peat bog? I think that's what that's saying. So why throw away the enemy's weapons and dump the bodies in the lake? And lots of what's being said is that the point is, with what we're saying is, in lots of ways, by throwing away the enemy's weapons, you're getting rid of who the enemy was. You're getting rid of the enemy's control over you. And how do I explain that? For example, you've all heard the adage, if you want to really get revenge against somebody, you ignore them. If they want to make you a meal, they say, oh, look, I'm sorry for what I've done, and they want to make you a meal. You ignore them making you a meal. They want to leave flowers at your doorstep. You ignore those flowers. You ignore everything the enemy's trying to do to you. It's what we do today. If you want to, if you've got a girlfriend, boyfriend, they really upset you. You ignore their phone call. You ignore everything that they do for you. This is that mindset. If your enemy, as you've overcome your enemy, you dump them with everything in the bog. That's what you do. It's sacrificial. You get rid of anything association. Even though it might make you wealthy, you get rid of anything to do with them, or you leave it there. What lots of the Zulus did at Islandowana, they left lots of the stuff there. If the Zulu had taken up all the rifles, all the artillery, all the rounds, everything, they would have been a good match for Chelmsford. But I know they took some stuff away. Keith, I know that, but they didn't take everything away. So what we're going to do, I think the best thing to do is to look at this map quickly. We're going to look at this map. It's in Italian. I will interpret that for you. After the break, I'm going to remind myself something about that plan, P-L-A-N. This is what back to Teutoburg Forest again, the evidence that lots of these bones. How can this be described? Well, what's happened is the Romans have been hacked to bits. When Germanicus goes there, 16 AD, everything's collected together and it's just dumped in the pit. And usually little bits of weaponry is just dumped in there as well, because Germanicus is marching into Germany. He can do without collecting any of the weaponry together. And this leads me into asking a big question, which I'm not going to answer. How is it Germanicus was able to march through this this landscape years later? And how is it Varus was completely defeated? And I will partly answer that, but there are questions there. And I'm not really sure whether Germanicus was able to identify some of the tribunes, any of the legata, the generals of the Germans, of the Roman army. I'm not sure how many bones were actually sent home, but lots of them were actually buried in situ. And this sort of last image that we're going to do this side, it looked nothing like this. This is a Teutoburger Forest, the Teutoburg Forest today. All those questions I've asked you guys in the lecture, you can answer them in a moment as I put the mics on. This is that forest, that woodland. It looked nothing like this. These are planted trees. Remember, we've had a First and Second World War since. You know, lots of the trees were cut down for pit props, tanks rolling through this landscape, and all the rest of it. It's nothing. And what would have happened if you can squint your eye, look in the distance, right? Really thick trees, a trackway that was half as wide as this, marching 3 Roman legions down here. You can imagine that if this was a really thick tree, somebody could have been hiding behind this thick tree, chucking projectiles at you, and you wouldn't have been able to get to them. And the point I'm trying to make is that there would have been so few casualties on the German side, because all they needed to do, if you were followed by a couple of Romans, you would have needed to go to a next tree. Those 2 Romans would have been butchered, got back to that tree, keep sending projectiles at the Romans. The other thing as well is the Romans wouldn't have been able to stop either, because behind them was another legion pushing you forward. So even if you tried to defend yourself against the Germans, somebody else was pushing you forward, and this was an absolute disaster. And the woman thing, folks. Now, what we do actually see in descriptions later on is that Varus's army consisted of 3 Roman legions, which would have had a strength of probably about 4,500 each. Strength of a full Roman legion was about 5,500. What usually happened if 1,000 of them stayed back in the barracks, or they were doing some of the campaigning. So what about the rest? So that leads you to no more than about 15,000. Then you've got a load of auxiliaries, a load of cavalry, auxiliaries were non-Roman legionaries. Basically, they were sort of mercenary types. They were people from conquered lands like would-be Britain a few years later. Places like Syria, Africa, people who wouldn't have the same gear as a Roman legionary. That's another lecture. And then that made up the army. It was unlikely, very unlikely, a 99% chance that there were no women with them, and a 90 to 100% chance that there were no children with them. And why? This was a Roman army that was told to go into that forest, help Arminius. I use the word help Arminius. What do I mean by that? And probably the women and everything were left behind. And at that stage as well, folks, in AD 9, a legionary was forbidden to marry until they retired. So, you know, and there wouldn't have been prostitutes and all the rest of it. They would have stayed back at the legionary base. And we also know that because none of the bones that have been excavated so far have a single bone associated with a woman. So in other words, why have I been going on? I've just been going on again. Whoever's got the phone, please get it now. The reason why I've gone on about that is that women, the phone's just put me off stride. Oh yeah, it was said that the chroniclers wrote that women were butchered as well. But who wrote the history? The Romans wrote the history. And that was probably a little bit put in there to just make out that the Germans were really bad people, right? So again, the historians were wrong. There's no evidence for that, and ignore that bit of history. What we're going to do, we're going to put the mics on now and stop sharing. And nice to have you joining us, Jane. But I know you were going to join us a bit late. And Jane has been really quiet. So Jane can join me after the break as one of my guinea pigs. I'm going to put all your mics on now. Unmute. We'll unmute you all. And unmute Ellen. Ellen's got a question I know she wants to ask. So's Keith. I asked Goff a question. And hang on a minute. Oh, Goff is there, but he's gone. Right, so quickly, Jim, anything you want to ask? No? Keith?
Yes. Yes, hang on.
Hang on. Jim, quickly.
As Germanicus went in and defeated them, do you think he could have chopped the trees down on the way in?
Well, no, Germanicus was going somewhere else. He was going deeper into Germany. He was campaigning. The Germans knew he was on his way. He was there to support pro-Roman tribes. Germanicus cutting down trees. It's likely that Germanicus probably sent engineers up front to cut down some of the trees for him to get his legions through. So yeah, that makes sense. That does make sense. Yeah, I would be for that. Varus had no time to cut down any trees. Why he did this, it's madness. Keith?
I was just going to add that you talk about what the Germans did to the captive Romans, but it's only the same as what Boudicca and the Iceni did in Britain to the Romans once they captured Colchester and St Albans and places like that. So that was normal behaviour of what we would call pagan tribes.
I'm glad you used the word pagan tribes. I really, that's a good word to use. Chris? No?
I was just thinking that they used, the Germans used terrorist tactics, which, you know, sort of not being seen by the enemy and hit and run sort of thing. So I think they were picked off like, you know, terrorists do today, or partisans, whatever you...
Depending on which way you're looking at them, yeah.
Like
freedom
subterfuge.
Fighters, yeah.
Yeah, subterfuge, exactly. Sue?
Yes, I was just thinking along those same lines, that it's almost like they're snipers, aren't they?
Yes.
That they're there from a safe position.
Picking them off because the Romans couldn't respond. The Romans couldn't get their bowmen in there because if they shot up, it would just go into a tree. I'm gonna leave Ellen for a second. Karen, anything?
No,
Jane?
very interesting.
Jane? No. Andrea's not there. Rosamond? No. Anything?
No.
Right, Ellen, that jaw that you saw.
Oh, right. There was quite a bit of bone loss and a lot where the gum fitted round the teeth. That had gone down a lot. because of that dark brown area around the rim of the teeth.
Yeah.
But the teeth look great, but there was a lot of gum and bone loss around the edges. But can I ask a question? You said there was a torrent of missiles onto the Romans, but if they were in a heavily wooded forest, I don't see how that would work.
Well, basically, the hit and run tactics, because the Romans are exposed along. If you've got the Romans in the middle, you've obviously the people beyond the trees are able to throw into that area, but obviously as the Romans try and throw out, they've got no idea where they're throwing at. But the people actually throwing in, the hit and run tactics, are able to throw projectiles in. That's the point I was trying to make.
All right. And in World War II, the British used to cut off the noses of the enemy and stuff sawdust in there. And also, Goff, do you want to... What?
Hang on, why was that?
Because this is what happens in war. People get scared, people get wound up, people are so frightened that they do obnoxious things to the enemy.
And this is the British Army?
Yeah, in World War II. But in warfare, horrible things happen. People, they just act differently.
Yeah, true.
If they were in society, it would be different to when they're actually on the battlefield. But and also, Goff, do you want us still to collect your lids or not?
Yeah, well, I can't collect them.
No, I know that, but I didn't know if you wanted us to collect them and save them.
We are still collecting these, yeah.
Okay.
All right, I'm still saving them.
Yeah, I've got about 10 tons, I reckon, by now.
I got some too.
and Goff, bringing this back to order, Goff, with lots of the things I've said, I've been highly critical, and then I've brought myself back in. Of what I've said, some of the things I've said, which have been quite disparaging, are they fair comments to be making?
Oh, I absolutely agree with you. And it's so, like Alan says, people are, yeah. But I've been to the Teutoburg Forest. It's where my family live, near there, in Lower Saxony. And the landscape is very flat there, except for this enormous ridge, which is where the Teutoburg Forest is.
The Kalkaris Ridge, yeah.
Yeah, and a huge ridge with two low valleys either side. I don't know what it was like then. Who knows? I don't know. But it's quite heavily wooded now. But surrounded by agricultural land, cereals and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Also, I might comment
Thanks for that, Goff. Go on.
At the time when this was, I think, September, the end of the campaign season, the weather was very bad. So it was pouring with rain, it was very cold, and the Roman soldiers had been marching for days under attack. So that added to the fact that the ground was very boggy as well. So they were caught between the heights on one side and the bogs on the other. So
and it would have been very churned
through
up.
a small area.
Very, very, very churned up. Yeah, that would have had an effect as well, being very churned up. And the other thing as well is he couldn't retreat because behind him would have been all his baggage and wagons and stuff. And the only way forward was forward.
Yeah, would it be true to say that the Romans were only used to fighting in a certain way?
Yes.
Yeah, they weren't used to
yes,
hit and run tactics and things.
We haven't done much about Arminius at this minute, but we will when we look at that plan. Arminius had been trained like a Roman. In fact, he was classed as a Roman. But we'll go on to that after the break. Arminius knew everything. He knew everything about Roman tactics, and it's true to say that the only way to destroy Rome is by Rome itself. The only people that managed to capture Rome, the first time Rome was captured, the people who captured Rome were actually allies of Rome. Odoacer, who had seemed to be a mercenary general working for the last Roman emperor, Romulus, in the year 476, he also captured Rome because he knew Roman tactics. And it was Arminius who knew Roman tactics who was able to defeat Varus. So, we'll take a break now. Thank you very much, and go from there.
Lovely.
Good tea.
Cup of coffee now.
Again.
Done.
Get along.
I wonder if I took my clothes off and ran around my living room, would anyone notice?
No.
I don't think anyone would notice Rosamond. Oh, Rosamond's just turned her thing on. Ah, la, 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 la. This is good today. It's good. I think when you
How are you doing, Chris? Okay?
I'm fine, thank you. Yeah, how about you?
Yeah, I'm doing fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How's your grandson? Is he any better?
Yeah, he's doing okay now.
Yeah.
Some antibiotics and that sorted it, but he still hasn't been seen by a dentist, so
Really?
I won't see him.
That seems a bit harsh.
If it starts to complain again, so the bleeding has stopped and he had antibiotics, but that it hasn't gone away, is it?
No. It's just suppress the infection, isn't it?
Yeah, so if it comes back again, I'm just going to go and camp outside the dental hospital.
Well,
Can't do anything else.
Yeah, I thought dentists could treat people because they've got the, you know, the masks and everything.
Well, they won't.
Mm.
I was going to have to ask Ellen.
Yeah,
what
yeah, what the policy is. Well, she might not know though now. But,
yeah. Well, she should do, shouldn't she? She
Yeah.
should know what the rules are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Has he gone home now, or is he staying with you?
He's gone home for the week to see how he goes, and he's coming back.
There was a phone in this morning, and they asked that question about the dentist.
Today?
Yeah,
What did they say, Goff?
They said that there is emergency treatment available.
They would him, and he's fine.
You have to phone up, and you know, but the dentists have been told by their union or whatever it is, the dental association, that they can't do anything, just like chiropodists and opticians.
Oh, well, the chiropodists.
You can. Yeah.
Because I know someone whose glasses broke, and I mean she's got dementia, but they sent someone down to pick the glasses up and mended them for her. Yeah. Yeah,
they'll do stuff like that, but
yeah,
and they will do. I mean, Gwyneth, she does a triage if you want.
Yeah.
And Gwyneth Morgan.
Yeah.
And if it's really sort of serious, she'll come in and she'll see you.
Yeah.
But they've been told not to do it. Unless it's an emergency. Yeah.
Yeah, weird.
You can get it done. It depends how bad it is.
Yeah.
Well, we could get a dentist to see my 5-year-old grandson, and he was bleeding. They wouldn't.
Yeah.
They suggested they gave him antibiotics and suggested they send him like a putty to put in the tooth, and then they've had some sort of argument over why, you know, a 5-year-old would even get that, so they haven't even provided with that putty to put in his tooth to stop it.
Well, I'd change my dentist if I was you.
Well, I told them this, but obviously it's not helping at the minute. So all I said again, I'm just going to take him to the hospital and sit outside till they see him.
Yeah, I mean, that's the advice, I think.
Yeah.
I'm not going to let a 5-year-old suffer with toothache and a tooth.
No.
Put him off dentist for life.
Yeah.
More than that, because I actually knew somebody in their 80s that went blind because of their teeth.
Really?
The nerve in the tooth got infected and they went blind. So it's a bit, it is slightly more than just ignoring it and waiting for it to go away.
Yeah.
Very worrying, isn't it?
Ellen.
Yeah.
Hello. What's the policy? I've got a 5-year-old grandson, and he was bleeding from the centre of his tooth. So his dentist won't see him. So they sent him some antibiotics, which has stopped it all for now. And they were going to send some putty stuff for us to put in his tooth. But then they had some sort of discussion with somebody, and they wouldn't allow that either. So
is it a back tooth that's split or a front tooth that's broken off?
It's one of the ones about there.
And it's split. So if it's red,
no, it's split. It's as though the middle bit's just gone.
Yeah, and so the nerve is showing because the blood comes from the nerve in the middle.
Yeah, that's what I could see. I could see it was bleeding from the middle of the tooth.
Is it a tooth about to be lost because another one is growing up?
He hasn't lost any teeth yet. When
you say he's 5, he shouldn't have lost any. The first thing he should get when he's about 5 or 6, mainly 6, is an extra grown-up tooth growing at the back without losing any baby teeth.
Right.
But sometimes if he's had decay in the middle of the baby tooth, it will split. And then
all I can see is a circle and a red dot. That's all I can see. He's not complaining about it at the moment since he's had the antibiotics.
Yeah, but it sounds like the nerve is exposed for some reason. And if so, that can be very painful, but also lead to a very big infection.
Yeah.
In the dental surgery, you've got some medicament that you can put on it and then put a temporary filling on top.
Yeah, but for some
And
reason they won't give us that.
Yeah, the medicament will kill the nerve off,
Right.
to get rid of the pain. But without seeing it, it's a bit.
They won't see him. I've
Yeah.
sent pictures and they still won't see him.
Yeah, they do have an emergency dental places in various areas.
Right, okay.
But if
So
he's
you
not,
don't go to anything. They've just said no, can't
yeah.
be seen.
if he's not in pain as such now, then they wouldn't treat it as an emergency.
Right.
Or
So
if
next
there's no swelling. If there's a lot of swelling, that's an emergency.
Right, okay. Okay, so next time he's in pain, basically, I contact the emergency and do it that way.
Yeah, well, or if you contact your dental surgery, they should then put you on the emergency track.
No, they won't do anything. All they did was arrange for antibiotics, and then they sent an adult dose instead of a child's dose, so we had to go and see the doctor about it.
That's
So we're not impressed.
That's wrong. But an emergency is really, really bad pain or swelling. Because other than that, if you're not in pain or not having any difficulty, then that's not termed an emergency.
No, he was in pain, but once he's had the antibiotics, it seems to have calmed down.
Yeah.
So he came off the antibiotics 2 days ago, so now we're waiting to see what happens.
If you've got an exposed nerve, though, that can flare up again.
Right.
And because it's an exposed nerve, that can give you a lot of pain.
Yeah, I know. And he's only,
Also, the infection is in the tooth then and can go down into the socket and cause problems.
yeah, so it's weird. All I can think of is to go and sit outside the dental hospital and go, you've got to see it.
From the chemist, you can buy a temporary filling material that's in a paste.
Yeah, they were going to send him some, but then they seem to have had some sort of, they said for legal reasons they can't provide it.
All right, you can buy it in a chemist.
So it's all right to do it then ourselves?
Yeah, if you want to, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I
make sure you've got clean hands, and you can mix it up and say put it on a little spoon handle and then pop it in and flatten it down.
Okay.
Yeah, gently. Yeah.
I'll do that. Is there anything I can clean the inside out with? Sorry, everyone.
That's all right. Well, fascinating.
We'll just have a complaint off Garth later, that's all.
No. This is good stuff.
Emergency Ward 10.
We'll not know what to do if we have an emergency with our own teeth now.
Yeah.
Hey, do you know if we make this into a film, do I get to dress up as a woman again?
Can anyone help me with my hemorrhoid?
Andrea, if you get boiled salty water, let it cool down. He can swish his mouth out with it just to clean the cavity out of it.
Okay. And then stick the thing in.
Because otherwise, if there's a hole, it tends to trap food in there. Well, you don't want to go putting anything on top of food.
That's what I'm worried about.
Yeah, so swish out with cooled boiled salty water.
Okay. Thanks, Ellen.
A dentist back in England. In England, are dentists going back?
No.
I don't know. I get updates from the Welsh one.
Right.
But
Only I was just thinking that quite happy for teachers to be breathed over by 5-year-olds, but not dentists.
That's what that big phone-in was this morning. That the teachers were complaining they got to go back, and dentists and opticians don't have to work.
Yeah.
Right.
Have you got a pair of pliers?
No.
Not very impressed. And he's coming towards you with a pair of pliers.
Yeah, left a bit, right a bit, up a bit. Oh.
He never speak to you again.
Oh, but I will have a go when he comes tomorrow. I will have
With
a
the
go.
pliers.
Oh dear. Poor thing.
Toothache's horrible, isn't it? It's the worst kind
It's
of
the
pain,
one
I think.
Yeah.
That and
can't
backache.
explain it to a 5-year-old.
Pardon?
You can't explain it to a 5-year-old.
No.
No.
Right. Let's get back to it. Let's get back to the nitty gritty.
Battle commence.
Rosamund and Andrea, can you stay behind at the end? I want a quick chat with you about something.
Okay.
Ooh, school days, that has.
What's that?
It's taking me back to my school days.
I've been a very naughty girl.
Detention.
Oh no.
We're all in detention anyway.
So let's get back to. I got to try and get back into the rhythm.
The grisliness of it all.
Yeah.
Oh.
Do you know what? I was really into it then. What have I got to do to get me into this? Think about spending a night with Kathy. Right, that's done it.
Let's watch these. Oh, you'll have to edit it.
Oh yeah. Oh, by the way, we haven't mentioned Kathy, so we've mentioned her twice now, so we've got to mention her a third time. Oh, and by the way, the next newsletter's in front of me, and that'll be with you this week as well. So, when I say this week, it's the Royal Mail at this minute, so that'll be with you soon. And we'll also, the other thing as well is we're also going to be updating our website. So that'll list everything that's going on, including the other classes and the forum and what have you. And next week,
I've got a question. Oh yeah, I can see now.
I haven't finished yet.
Yeah.
I'll ask the question in a minute, and hopefully you'll have forgotten what the question is. So next week we'll be doing the archaeology of Pueblo Bonito and the disaster of the people that disappeared.
Ooh.
Right. So what was your question, wonderful Jane? Do you know what, Jane? You always look good.
Oh, thank you.
Can I have a
I was just going to ask you what.
Go on.
What have you done with your hair? Where's it gone?
He's tied it in a bun.
Yeah, I've actually tied it in a bit of a bun, yeah.
Oh, I see. Let's have a look then. Turn around.
Oh, God. What am I actually doing? I haven't done much to it. Can you see it?
Oh, yeah.
It's a bit samurai now.
Yeah.
It's better without your headphones on.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. What is this? A non-character assassination? Why didn't you tell me that you love me and go for hilt?
I think you should wear it like Gareth Bale.
Oh yeah, that'd be great, wouldn't it? Oh, do you know what? I'm not name dropping, but Joshua Navidi. Maybe I should have my hair in dreadlocks. So right, okay. So let's get into it. So what I would like, we're gonna mute everybody, and I want Jane's company now. I want Jane.
Oh, jealous.
So we're gonna mute Andrea. I'm not going to pick on Rosamund as I always do. I'm going to keep Gough with me. Everyone else is going to be muted. Ellen hasn't been with us long enough to speak in self. Oh, that's not good. Get rid of Keith. He's a miserable sod. And Chris, wicked witch. So we're left with Jane and Gough. Is that okay, folks?
Okay.
Let's screen share, and we're going to go straight on to this lovely image. And so when we left, just before we left, Gough described the landscape south of here. He described sort of open plains, agricultural land, and then you sort of see a little bit of a valley. You see Calcaree's Hill, bit of a hillock, and we've got the trees. This is what we're talking about. And it's so no, there wasn't Highway A1 then, but I don't know that's how. So we've got Calcarees, and what you've got along this trackway, a very narrow trackway. It's describing this would have ended up going onto what's described as the main path. But then this is what happens. now we need to go into a bit of a fairy story now, but isn't a fairy story. And in my notes at the end, it says that Varus was a good friend of Arminius. Now, Arminius was the son of a local Germanic leader, and this was about 20 years ago. And Germanius, Arminius, with his brother, was handed over as hostages to the Romans by his father, the king of a local region of Germania. And they were hostages, and they were to be trained in Roman ways. Arminius was trained to fight like a Roman, think like a Roman, be a Roman. He was meant to take on the Roman sense of civilization. And the whole point is, when you hand him back over to his father, he's going to then reign in place of his father, and he's going to reign like a Roman. It's going to be the sense of Pax Romana. Everyone's going to be friends. Everyone's going to live happily ever after. That was the idea, and this is what usually happened. Arminius actually met with Varus on a few occasions. He actually sat down and had a meal with Varus. And this is described by the historians later. So before AD 9, Arminius is sent out to subjugate some kind of rising in the interior of Germania, beyond the Roman supply lines. So Arminius is sent in there with a load of auxiliaries. He basically says to those auxiliaries on the way, actually, we're actually going to turn against our paymasters. We're going to turn against those Romans that have enslaved us for many years, pretending that we're going to be free people and all the rest of it. And Arminius has said, right, those that want to stay can stay and fight with me against Rome and the German people, or you're just going to die. So in other words, with that sort of ultimatum, you're going to side with Arminius. So Arminius then sent a message to Varus. Varus, it's September. I need some help. Send in the legions. It's like a typical thing from a film. Varus, send in the legions. This is what Arminius is saying. We're over here, Varus. And this is basically what happened. There's no sort of acting there. We're here. I need your help, Varus. Varus commanded 3 legions and marched into the Teutoburg forest, right? Arminius said, he gave him a little bit of a plan. If you go this way, blah, blah, blah. Varus followed the instructions. He completely trusted Arminius. So what happened as the 3 legions are marching into the Teutoburg forest, and if you think the distance isn't 5 miles, okay, 3.5 kilometers, here to here, sort of to the end, it's more like 3 kilometers rather than 5 miles. It's not a long length, but this is over 3 days, 3.5, 4 days that the army's marching, and bit by bit, wonderful way that Chris said it earlier on. A nice question from Ellen. What's going on, the projectiles and all the rest of it. Really tight, narrow trackway. And it's really tight and narrow from here all the way in, because Arminius hasn't even got time to cut down the trees. So it's going to be really narrow. That they've indicated that this is a bit of a trackway. This is Will-o'-the-Wisp, but this is the worst nightmare of the Scandinavian stories, but this is in Germany. So what's happening is that what we know is Arminius is set up, I believe, 2 banks on either side of the trackway, but it's actually showing 1 embankment here. And that means that the Romans are forced into a bottleneck, and to be forced into a bottleneck, you must have another defense on the other side. But this sort of canal between the 2 great rivers is probably, and it's very marshy as well. So the Romans are forced to deviate. This sort of the trackway is hidden. They're forced to deviate. Arminius is saying, over here, Varus, come on, I'm over here. We need a bit of help. Be quick. And in other words, be quick. The army's hastened its pace. So it's likely that Varus had no idea what was going on with his men behind. But then again, that leads us with another question. these 3 legions were led by a legator, a general. Surely these 3 legions in order, one of the generals would have realized something's up. And this is a bit of the story I don't get. I don't understand that bit of the story. It's almost as if there's 3 intelligent generals led by an idiot like Varus, and the other 3 generals who are conditioned as they were generals of a Roman legion. You don't get to be a general of a Roman legion by being an idiot, right? These are people that were seasoned fighters, men in their legions that had been there for 25 years. Some of the body found by the archaeologists are between 20 and 45 years old. Some of these people had served for a long time in the Roman army. So why were they overcome by these Germans? And we're talking about the Germans had about, we don't know how many they had on this side. Maybe there was 5,000 of them. You could do this with 5,000 Germans, right? Remember, the Germans would have had to have fed themselves. The Romans had a marching army, right? They would have had to have prepared themselves. They needed supplies. So the less Germans you've got, the better, right? To be able to defend this. A fit German is better than 10 Germans who haven't fed for a week. And Keith knows exactly what I'm talking about. An army marches on its stomach, and that's definite. So you've got small numbers of Germans. I don't think the figure of 15,000 Germans is correct. I would go with 5,000. They've already built these defenses, and they're constantly throwing projectiles. So by the time Varus realizes a temporary fortress is made in the woods, which, trying to make a temporary fortress in the woods whilst you're being constantly attacked is an anathema. I don't understand how that works, and maybe the archaeology is wrong. But if the Romans did build a fortification in the woods, as my notes tell me in a short while, it was probably a pit that caused them to be slaughtered within their own defenses. There's this other thing going up here, the large swamp. I don't know who mentioned about the large swampy landscape a bit north of Teutoburg, Calcarees Hill. Don't know who mentioned that. But the Romans, in confusion, are going over a little bit of a bridge that we've got an illustration of, and they're heading towards the swamp, and they're all dying. What's happening is Arminius is saying, let them be. Let them go. We know they're going to die. There's what's said in history. Chushu, who writes The Art of War, Chushu says that you have to defeat the strongest of your enemy and not the weakest. So in other words, Arminius is probably saying, let them go. There's only a few thousand of them. Let them go, because they're going to die anyway. They're going to starve to death. So this is another little bit of the trail that we don't know. So what we need to do now, I want to go back to my other. Can you see a big forest at this minute? I don't know who's with me. Who's with me? Jane and
Stuff.
Jane, can you see the woodlands? No?
Yeah.
You can?
No.
So this is the image that we left with earlier on. So you can see the Great Woodland, and this is that plan a little bit bigger. Anyone want a quick look at this plan again? This is the Italian version. And obviously it's a bit more clearer there, and obviously the hill on the south. And if you notice, the fort is in a different location as well. Every time you look at this, things are different. Even the Italian plan and the English plan is different. So moving on. So these are those 2 golden coins. Jane, do those look good or what?
With what?
Those
What
2
am I looking at?
So I suppose you're looking at 2 golden coins.
No, I can't see anything. I can just see a small.
Right. Okay. You're on the wrong screen. Okay. I'll just get you off again. Start again. Right. Now, are you seeing 2 coins?
Hang on, it's coming any minute. Yes.
Right. Okay. Then obviously I didn't put the screen up earlier on. So looking at this is very different from the other plan that we've seen. I'll just mention that again, and then looking at those 2 coins. Do they look good, Goff and Jane?
Yes.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Yes, definitely.
That's known as an aureus, and basically a denarius, a silver denarius. There's X amount of denarius in an aureus, and this is likely to be you'd have a couple of these, and that's more or less a year's wages for a Roman legionary. The Roman legionary's pay was about a denarius a day. So if you're finding these are basically the equivalent of you know, a whole year's wage packet. You know, this is big money. And you're not going to find lots of these because Roman soldiers were paid in silver denarii. But they find these. These were the first bits of evidence that something was going on. And the interesting thing as well, the date of these, they weren't from 200 years AD. They weren't from before Christ. They were around the reign of Augustus, around the date that this is going on, about 9 AD. So this sort of sets the scene. This is, and they look really relatively good as well. So again, what we need to do is sort of feed a bit more out of what we've been talking about. Is, here we go, the sense of Arminius being referred to as Herman. What will remain of him will be the memory of how a nation tried to invent itself by fabricating history. Will help us to understand ourselves and other nations better. So what we're talking about, everything that I've said is in that sentence. I've said about Germany being accused of fabricating this event, which they didn't, but Germany was accused of fabricating this event because they overdid it. Herman never existed. It was Arminius was the one who led the Germanics against the Romans. So that there is referred to as a bullet. It's known as a lead slingshot bullet. Again, if you manage to get this into open battle, you could sling this around, and this would then act like a bullet and head somebody. If you manage to get them directly into the temple, it'll kill them, right? Even embed into their skull, so it's going to crack their skull, they're going to be dead. So again, they find these little bits of gems, and this is not something that, now the difference is, this is not a Germanic tool, this is a Roman weapon, this is a bit of lead. And one of the things I've been very much interested in is the misinterpretation of history. You guys know I love reanalyzing history and re-saying that actually this is wrong. In fact, this is very wrong. Arminius would not have been fighting the Romans on an open battlefield for a start. This was not an open battlefield. It would have been full of trees, and it's not what happened. If these went head on with the Romans like this, right, the Germans would have lost. Arminius knew it. Yeah, Arminius knew that not to fight the Romans in open battle. Do everything that we've discussed, but don't fight them in open battle. And, you know, everything's wrong about the illustrations that I see associated with this battle. And when we're thinking about it, even when I tried to find images of Teutoburg Forest, this is wrong, because though I don't know if any of you went with me to Savernake Forest, I think Keith did. And when we went to Savernake Forest, there was really big old oak trees, really big thick old oak trees. And if you get two big thick oak trees alongside each other, there's not much room between them. This is what we're talking about. But this is not what we're talking about. But the atmosphere is there. And what Keith described as it being a muddy landscape, it's not quite this time of year, by the way. This is autumn time. We're talking about September. Keith used the word, this is late in the fighting period, the time that people fought. Yeah, he was right. That's all correct. Varus knew all this, and it's still very confusing, those big questions. Why did he go ahead with it? Even if he's going to support Arminius, why is he going ahead with this? This is absolute mad. How is it Arminius knew he was going to send in 3 legions? You know, it's a small local uprising. Why not just send in 1 legion? Why 3? It might be that Varus wanted prestige. It's such a strange area of history. Warfare is such a strange area of history. When you look at Waterloo, Keith keeps telling me that you see lots of memorials associated with the French, and it's almost as if the French won the battle. Misinterpretation of history again. So obviously, looking at Calcaries, looking at the archaeological evidence, this would be part of something like a trumpet brooch. It's a nice little spring that hasn't been broken. It was on a cloak. The last time that was seen, it was still on a cloak. It's been you know, the cloak has long since degraded and been lost. But again, more looking at the archaeology, and this is, and can I just mention one other thing as well, is something about the archaeology here. This is the artifact as it's coming out of the ground. That looks very, it's not loamy soil, which you would associate with a woodland. So what's happened is that the Teutoburg forest that you see today has been deforested, has been planted. The rich nutrients have gone from the soil. And then obviously that's affected the archaeology underneath. And then obviously they've replanted the trees. As a detective, as an archaeologist, this is what I'm seeing. So obviously all the trees that you see there are being replanted. The trees back in the day would have been those thick, big oaks that I've been describing. The archaeology does help us tell stories. This is typical. These are the types of artifacts you're going to find. An old Roman Republican coin there. I do believe that is a Caesar Augustus coin. We know Caesar Augustus, he's the father of the Roman Empire, so we're going to find coins from him. We've got lots of lower values of Roman coins, the types of Dupontises. We've got the denarii that we'd associate. But like today, the Roman soldier would have had coins that had been in circulation for decades, hundreds of years. You know, as long as it's a silver coin, it would have remained in circulation. And these are, again, some of the objects that they've actually been finding. That coin to there isn't a Roman coin at all. That there looks like a Germanic coin, and this has been found there on the battlefield. I'd love to know the story of that coin there, but unfortunately we're not doing that today. So the little bits of sort of associated with rivets. It even looks like a button, but it's not. They didn't have buttons like that back then. It's a bit of a rivet. So that may have been as part of a pendant. So some array of the artifacts, they're all left behind. You know, there'd be millions of coins spread across that forest. Rather interesting story associated with this. This is the primer centurion, the centurion Marcus Caius. This is an epitaph to him, and after the battle itself, after the campaign in Teutoburg Forest, it's very few to none of the Roman bodies were recovered and taken out to be buried with the proper rites. This is the most senior centurion for the 18th Legion. You can see that there. The 18th Legion, so the 17th, 18th, and 19th Legion. And this is a memorial. Basically, his family had this erected. They didn't find his body. And this is one memorial to just one person. And this guy was 47. So, you know, he was about another 3 or 4 years. He might be due for retirement. He never ever made it, thanks to Varus. And again, painting the scene, painting the over sense of non-history. This is not what happened. But again, the romanticizing. I tell you what, if there's any artists out there amongst you guys, right, do me an illustration of really deep trees with a Roman column straggling in between, right, with projectiles being chucked down at them, make it really bloody and gory. That's the illustration I want to see, which I haven't been able to find. A little bit more text. We'll sort of phrase over some of this. Here we go. We've got the annihilation in the army. The figures change between 18 and 22,000. I'm going to remind you of that. The word Charuscan warlord Arminius, that was his tribe. Again, he had been Romanized, so he went back to that sort of tribe with his auxiliaries to sort of, you know, we are Roman, and then he said, no, we are German, and we're going to kick the Romans' butts. And he did it more than we could ever think. And this obviously sent shockwaves through the Roman world. And I think this next paragraph is rather interesting about, you know, the German hero and stuff. But after that, arguably, it explains why Germany to this day is divided into the Roman-influenced Catholic more fun-loving southwest, and the rougher, cooler Protestant north and east. I don't really go with that, but when you go to Germany, we used to have people that used to stay with us that used to be from northern Germany, and they weren't the Lederhosen sort of Bavarian type of Austrian fun-loving people that I would usually associate with Germans. They were the more Protestant north and east, and it's probably that's a really good point. It paints the idea that Germany is a divided country today, like the UK is a divided country. And German peoples are very different all over. This is why they've got their own sort of laws over the different provinces of Germany today. This all comes back to what's going on with that sense of Germania. So what we've got here, bones and weapons found. A few changes in some of the things I've said in a moment, but you'll understand why there's a difference. They have amassed a trove of evidence now at Kalkaris, such as human bones with terrible wounds, hundreds of coins, spear tips, lead sling bullets, which I've described, fragments of Roman armor, belt buckles, tent pegs, sandal nails, surgical instruments, and a spectacular face mask, which we've already discussed. And it's saying, actually, the thing is, when I found this sentence, and we looked at this on Tuesday, and we looked at this later on Tuesday, it sort of disagrees with what I've been saying, but they have yet to find irrefutable proof that the site near the village of Kalkaris is a low-lying area of woodland and fields some 15 kilometers from Osnabrück, really is the location of the battle. And the reason why archaeologists, even though they're finding all this evidence, right, they still got to have a little level of doubt. All the evidence that they're finding is Roman evidence of a great battle, right? That's what they're finding. But they don't, there's one thing that they're lacking, and they're lacking legionary insignia. So basically saying, you know, we've got the second century of the 19th Legion here. They haven't got that. And they're saying that they've got all the evidence. They can prove that it happened here, but they need irrefutable proof that a certain Joe Bloggs was here. This is what they're saying. So, you know, we've also questions remain over the sequence of events in the fighting that is believed to have started with ambushes on the thin Roman columns snaking through the forest before culminating at Kalkaris in a bottleneck between a hill and a moor, a very wooded landscape. They're obviously still looking at the metallurgical evidence. They're analysing the metallurgical evidence now as well. That's really interesting, because what they can work out, hopefully, instead of finding inscriptions associated with the 17th, 18th, and 19th, you know, bits of standard and, you know, and so on and so on. A belt buckle example, a belt buckle would, I'm going to show you some objects now, which I haven't shown anybody else. These are the types of things that they're looking for. If you can see these in the camera, what would happen is something like this, which would be a part of a Roman belt. There would be something saying the 19th Legion or the 18th Legion. They found nothing like this, which is a bit of a shame. But they have been finding objects like this, but with none of the insignia in. So they definitely need the insignia. But what they're saying, hopefully, is that if they can analyze the metal, and the metal is the metal that was produced in the area of where the 18th Legion comes from, then they'll be able to nail the 18th Legion, and people died from the 18th Legion at that locality. That's what they need to learn. They need to work out where the 17th Legion was wiped out, where the 19th Legion was wiped out, to really work out what's going on. So we're hoping for some piece of a helmet with an inscription or a plaque with a name of a unit or a stamped artillery bolt. And you know, some historians still have their doubts about Calcaries and say it could be the site of a later battle. But the circumstantial evidence in favour of it has been piling up steadily over the years. So what we're saying, all the evidence with the pits, all the stuff that we've already seen must be the site of this campaign. And then the historians come back into it. You know, the 8 pits containing the bones of men aged 20 to 45 have been found, with many skulls showing gaping holes. So when we talked about projectiles, Alan and Chris, we're talking about projectiles raining down on them into their skulls from above, just being chucked from the trees into it. Put it this way, with a tight column of Roman soldiers are going to hit somebody. That's it. Somebody's going to be hit. The pits tally with Roman accounts of how an army under the command of Germanicus, again the father of Caligula, discovered the battlefield in AD 16 and buried the piles of bleached bones strewn across it. And obviously we've got the account of soldiers' skulls being nailed to trees. You know, they've even found a hoard of 200 silver coins, which is an indication that the archaeologists are on the right track, literally. And what they've been finding, to try and get an idea, this is rather interesting, this next little bit of a clue, you know. And I would be a really poor archaeologist by saying that this is 1,000,000% the site. I'm just saying that I believe it's the site, and I'm going to go with the evidence. And what this says here is that it says here that the Roman fortifications that were built here, so they're saying that one of the sets of defense that they found is probably Roman, built by the Romans to defend themselves on the last day of the attack. And the reason why they're saying that is that the wood that they found there isn't indigenous to the forest. And that's key, because those that know any Roman soldier knows that a Roman soldier would carry 2 long pieces of timber. And what would happen is that overnight, on the night stop, the Roman soldier would get those 2 stakes, ram them into the ground. Another Roman soldier would do the same, and it'd be a palisade, right? So with that being used to create a palisade, that evidence again tells us this wood comes from outside, and that palisade, the portion, it could actually be the palisade associated with the Roman fortress there. And it's, again, looking at a bit more doubt about this 400-meter portion of the wall previously found on the battlefield, which has partially been reconstructed by the museum. And it's saying that when we opened the lecture today, we said that the archaeologists may have thought it was a portion of bank associated with Arminius. Then I went with the Roman bit. Unfortunately, some other archaeologists have then argued and saying, actually, this is the one that Arminius built. But the evidence tells us it was the one that the Romans built. So, you know, we got all this to and fro in. But like a battle, it's very confusing. So you're going to get sort of archaeologists arguing this bit of the event, that bit of the event. And Keith will tell you, we don't really know the unfolding events of the Battle of Waterloo, truly. We don't know absolutely everything about it. And they're finding new things today. And Waterloo, 1815. This is 2,000 years ago, this site. So, you know, we're going to make mistakes as archaeologists. We're going to reanalyze things. We're going to look at things in a different way all the time. It was suggested the fortifications that they got as a Roman camp that would fit in with historical accounts of the battle. The scenario would then be that the Romans, under pressure from the Germanic attacks, set up a fortification in the afternoon or evening on the 3rd or the 4th day, very hastily and very makeshift, and that they fought there and were beaten and then attempted to flee northwards across the moor. And it said as well that those defences may have been, in other words, they had them. The Germans had them in one area, and all they need to do was just keep chucking projectiles in on them, and the Romans are all going to die. So the search for answers is as thrilling as it is poignant. The clues in the ground tell stories of desperate legionaries burying their money. I disagree with that. Why would a legionary even bother to bury his money? He's not going to go back for it. The dead and the dying being violently stripped of their armour, of bodies left to rot in the forest, of victors calmly stacking looted war material for recycling and never coming back for it. It's a fascinating place because it gives us a snapshot of an important event as well as a sense of the people who fought and died here. And you could think from different points of view. From a German point of view, it could be a sense of furore. From an Italian point of view, a sense of utter tragedy. And it's rather interesting, if you want to talk about politics with this, if this site had been excavated and they found the remains in 1940, could you imagine the relationship between Germany and Italy? The Italians saying, actually, the Germans wiped us out here. Why are you celebrating this find? You can think about the political implications there between Mussolini and Hitler, but it wasn't found then. It wasn't found back then. Archaeologists found scores of clues that the battle ended disastrously, as the accounts and the evidence tells us. Many small items such as buckles, hinges, and connecting parts of body armor were found, suggesting that they broke off as they were torn from the dead. An archaeologist found metal frames ripped from shields, folded and ready for transport to be melted down. Plausible theory is that they were in piles of loot to be distributed amongst the victorious German warriors, and they were simply forgotten, churned up in the woodland and forgotten about. There was too much. You couldn't take it all away, you know. Small piles of coins. It looks like again, I don't agree with the attempt to hide coins. You know, to be honest with you, right, the last thing I'm going to be thinking of is hiding my coins, to be honest with you. It's absolutely ridiculous. And the point is, sometimes archaeologists don't think straight. Well, you've met me, but some archaeologists don't think straight. And I just think maybe we should just be thinking about the unfolding disaster. How could, big question, how could a Roman army of that size succumb to Germanic tribesmen they had previously been able to vanquish with their superior discipline, training, and equipment? And obviously it does come down to Arminius. He commanded a troop of Germanic cavalry attached to the Roman army. He knew them like the back of his hand. Varus trusted him. The two men had dined together, and Arminius led Varus into a trap by persuading him to make a detour to put down a rebellion. Brilliant. But again, I've still got problems with the evidence. It still doesn't make sense. Okay, you can hoodwink Varus, but as a senior Roman commander, as a legionary commander, I would have thought, right, this is not a good idea. We've got to get out of here. So it's something not quite right with the full story. The Germans clearly maneuvered the Romans into a situation where they couldn't bring their superiority to bear. Also, as soon as psychology comes into it, as soon as people sense the possibility of defeat, an army crumbles, discipline goes, and then the strength of the Roman army, which was to obey commands as a unit, was gone. In the end, it was every man for himself. And to be honest with you, right, they're not going to be able to do what they're doing on the left in that illustration. It's not possible. It's not happening. And the whole idea of the Roman war machine is to keep going and to destroy your enemy. These guys keep going forward into a trap. There's nothing, there's nothing more to be said than that. In Roman times, military equipment forged or repaired, and this is the point that they're saying that if they can work out, each Roman legion would have a place that they're getting their material from. It's remelted down, reforged. That fingerprint would give you an idea of where the Roman legions were associated with this landscape. The legions of Varus were stationed along the Rhine, the frontier between the Roman Empire and the subdued German tribes for decades. By contrast, the troops of Germanicus, who conducted a punitive campaign against German tribes 6 years after the Battle of Teutoburg Forest, were drawn from regions as far away as today's Spain and Hungary. And the point to be made with that is rather interesting. There's a clue in that sentence. Germanicus, he was named Germanicus because he was the conqueror of some German tribes, but that's a lecture that we probably won't do. But the interesting thing is Spain and Hungary. Well, Spain is a very different landscape than Germany, very different. So surely Germanicus troops were less able to deal with the German landscape than the troops of Varus. I'm putting that question in there, and I'm not going to answer it. What I'm trying to say is the story is strange. By analysing, again, the metal from calcaries, researchers will be able to identify exact units. And obviously, there's been nothing about the DNA, folks. We need to really think about the DNA. I don't want to talk about this propaganda with this bit here with Herman and so on. Let's go down to this. Arminius wasn't the liberator for Germania, and it's simply wrong to call this the hour of the German nation's birth. The First Reich. The more than 50 German tribes of the ancient period were the forefathers of many European nations, not just the Germans. And Arminius didn't unite them. He persuaded 5 tribes to join him. So that's 45 that didn't. And he was killed by members of his own tribe a few years later. Do we, you know, again, this is typical of humanity. This is typical not of Germany. This is typical of human nature. Somebody has an amazing victory, and then suddenly he's knocked off by his own people. You know, he's forgotten by his own people. He's discarded. And then years later, Arminius becomes Herman in history, the great defeater of the Romans, and he's used as a nationalistic symbol. And the history is distorted, and you don't believe it. And, you know, these things that we've mentioned. And again, this is more about sort of the visitors and the history side and so on, and reenactments. And the rather interesting thing is that the museum at Calcaries that they've actually, the building at Calcaries that they've converted into a museum was a former college to train Nazi and SS officers. And they've made this building into a museum, which is a bit of a strange dichotomy there. But I don't think the dichotomy is there. What they're trying to say is like, this is the real history. Forget everything else. We're using this building associated with this. Forget everything else. This is what we're trying to say. And maybe they will get things right. Back to these sort of final illustrations and nice little battle illustrations. You know, the trees are all wrong. The open area is all wrong. The Germans are not going to be risking their lives. You know, these guys have got families. You know, this is September. I'm not sure when harvest time is, but obviously harvest may have come and gone, or they've got to go. These German guys need to go home to their families. There's 1 or 2 women amongst them, and the Roman pilums is not showing what I want to see. I want a proper illustration. These are some more of the, these are not some of the Roman military equipment. This is some more of the military equipment for the Germanic tribesmen, are more the auxiliaries that had formerly been Roman soldiers, and these are probably some of the ones that the Germanic tribesmen actually used. The pilums themselves, a pilum itself would have had a small head like this, a long metal shaft, and I'll show you what a pilum is. These things are pilums. You've got that there, shaft, a wooden shaft here, and when this hit a shield, it would have weighed down the shield, but these probably wouldn't have been any good either. So they've done these reconstructions, and they're saying that what they're saying is that some of the archaeologists are reconstructing these at Calcaries are saying that the Roman defenses that they found are actually Arminius's defenses. But as an archaeologist, everything's wrong about this. This should be in a thick woodland, and directly in front of that, those pits. And those pits are the early archaeological evidence of that mule that we saw at the beginning being impaled on those stakes in those very pits in front of those defenses. I think that's an illustration of Germanicus. And this is more akin to what's going on. I like this one. These are some of the Roman soldiers retreating north towards the marsh. They're having to defend themselves as they escape over the bridge. Those ones that were allowed to escape to then go to their impending doom. Now, have I said from day one in this lecture that nobody survived this campaign? The answer is we don't really know. And if you had survived this campaign, you would have probably been in. You'd have probably your legion was now struck off the lists. You would have been redistributed to another legion, and your involvement with this campaign erased. it would have been a sense of shame. I would not have admitted that I would have fought with Varus. The problem is you would have had a stamp showing that you're a Roman legionary on your arm anyway. So lots of different answers, lots of different questions there, no answers. But I think this is a little bit more like what I want to see. Again, completely wrong. I don't know what's going on there. An artist that's forgotten to put a load of trees in there with that one. Oh, and there's Arminius again. Again, nonsense. Absolute nonsense. But ending with nonsense, this is the last slide. Goff and Jane, a little bit of discussion from you two, and then we'll bring in the mics. Anything you two want to say?
It just all seems a little bit, but everything is wrong, isn't it? You just can't believe that they kept coming and coming into a trap like that. Surely they would have turned round.
Now, the answer is if they turned round. Now, there's 2 points here. This is a double-edged answer. If they turned round, their baggage would have blocked. Their wagons would have blocked the way into the forest or woodland. But if it's a thick woodland in the first place, they wouldn't have brought much baggage with them, right? So the answer then is if they tried to escape, the way would be blocked by dead Roman soldiers. The other thing as well is if I was a senior Roman commander, right, I would have led with my men and I wouldn't have been with Varus, and I would have seen the situation at the back of the column and I would have at least tried to fight my way out. I wouldn't have continued. And also as a Roman legionary general, I would have known that this was mind my French, a tit-ass idea. This was a really stupid idea. And why this continued, I don't know. Do you know, Jane? You know, it's that old adage. You know, when you fall into a pit, you keep digging yourself a deeper and deeper hole. But that's you digging yourself a deeper and deeper hole. There are several commanders involved in this, and why did all of them follow this idiot Varus? Legionary commanders did not think. The chain did not think the same as modern commanders. You know, we'll follow the modern commander to the end. They felt independent. The reason why you're a legionary commander is you think independently, and you are right. There's something not quite right about all of this, but there is something that we can't deny: the archaeological evidence, which we have seen. We know it. So there is a lot of fact in this. And I wish their history hadn't been distorted by silly historians over time. And Goff, before I put on the mics.
Yeah, well, what I've heard about this, Arminius, they think that Arminius for a long time had been anti-Roman, but had ingratiated himself into the Roman sort of people. And he'd planned this campaign for a long time.
And do you know what, right? Do you know what? You're my dad, Goff, and it's like you've given me as a hostage to Rome. I'm not going to see you for 20 years. I'm not going to see Mum. I'm not going to see my brothers and my sisters. I will build up resentment, right? No matter how much you train me, no matter how much the Romans are training me to make me into a Roman. I know that when you die, Dad, I'm going to take over. So I will want to go back and take over the world that you have provided, right? So no matter how much I've been indoctrinated into the Roman Pax Romana, I will go back to type. And yes, you are dead right in what you've said. He's been building that resentment, not for a year, for about 20 years. He was given as a hostage in 11 BC. This event happened in 9 AD. So you can work out your maths there. 20 years of resentment. I would be really peed off. So what we're going to do, unfortunately, nobody's really disagreeing with anything, which I'm sure Keith will. What we're going to do, if we can try and keep questions and what you've got to say really short, and make it worthwhile. No silliness, Jim. Jim, anything you want to say?
Why did they leave the weapons behind after a battle? I mean, it would be sensible to collect all this stuff and reuse it all.
No, it doesn't. As I said, with the evidence from the bog bodies that we've looked at, with the evidence from the Alken bog in Denmark, 325 miles north of the Teutoburg forest, it's almost as if there's the association. There's an association with the dead. If you bury the association with the dead, you bury the name. And if you erase the name, you erase the shame. And Keith knows exactly what series I've got that one from. And to be honest with you, they did collect some stuff, but there was also too much of it. There was far too much. The reason, again, why we find stuff on the battle of, why we find material on the Somme battlefield that we will be doing over the next few months, the archaeology of the Somme, actually, because there was always too much there. You couldn't collect it all. It was impossible. They didn't have enough wagons to take it all away. And these are people. And the other thing as well is there's no roads to get this stuff, so people are having to carry this stuff out. So, you know, you go home and you think, all right, I left a few shields back there, I'll just leave them there. Keith?
Marius has got all the blame for this, but it's still speculation, because up until this campaign, he had been a very well-regarded Roman officer, if you like, and carried out other campaigns which had gone well. So it's strange that suddenly he should perform so badly, basically.
And that is the question. Okay, we've got the archaeology. We know it happened. There's something not quite right. And something's just occurred to me. If we're not finding any legionary insignia, right? Was this as big a campaign as we think it was? Were those actually the legionaries that we say went in there? All these questions are going to be answered. There's something not quite right. Keith is right. There's something not quite right about the history. The archaeology will tell us the truth. Chris?
No, nothing. Sorry, Carl.
You're going to say something else, Keith? No?
I was only going to suggest, anyway, that the one thing we don't know anything about is the health of the Romans at this time, and whether, in fact, if there were three, as we think there are 3 legions, whether the health of the legionaries, maybe they were suffering from a plague or something like that, and therefore were already suffering before they actually started withdrawing. So maybe they were, not at full fitness.
There could be lots of things like that. There could be lots of things. And the other thing as well is, Arminius would have known that, and he would have said, whatever you do, guys, don't go anywhere near the Romans, just kill them, right? Just fire something at them and run away. Yeah, there are all these different things. Ellen, quick.
Oh, sorry, I think that map might have been quite good, because where the brown bit was with the forest and then the green, and you've got that river and the swamp one side, is quite low land. So I think that green on the forest side might have been less forested. So like with the map, if they said the Germans were in the forest, they could have thrown missiles out to the Romans in the open area, especially as it's swampy and somebody said that it was raining a lot. It may have been very, very misty, because in September you can get quite warm conditions.
Yeah.
There might have been a thick mist, and the Romans were lured into an area they couldn't see anything with. And then the missiles came from the forest on them, and it would have been very successful wipeout.
And Arminius would have known all this. He's not a fool. He's not a fool. Yes, like it. Nice bit there. Disagreeing with my completely wooded thing, but bringing in another thing then that also works like it. Karen?
It just shows the perils of training up your enemies in your ways that they then use it against you.
It's Pax Romana. I think in lots of ways, the Romans were good at doing this. When we look at the time of Carausius in 286, 287, he'd been a civilian who had been trained up to be a Roman commander, and he wasn't a Roman, and he turned against Rome, caused a great rebellion, Britain set apart. These things repeat themselves in history. Andrea, anything?
No.
Rosamond?
Well, could the legions have risen up from within and turned on themselves? Could he have had spies within the legion? Arminius. Do you see what I mean? The 3 legions that were coming in to attack Germany, could Arminius have had spies like within there and then turned on from within?
Do you know we're going to actually come to that in a minute, and I will respond with that in a minute. And what about you,
That's why
Sue?
there wouldn't be insignia, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry.
the insignia is key to this. Is a rather interesting. Sue, quickly, anything?
No. I'm just absorbing what you said.
What I need to come back to that one thing from Roz. Anything Goff and Jane wants to say quickly, because you've already said it. Yeah. Okay.
No.
I will see you all next week, and obviously on Saturday and Wednesday, and we've got the forum next Wednesday as well at 1:30. I want a quick word with Roz and Andrew at the end, but that point that Rosamond just made there is something. Do you know, when we do lectures, there's something. Chris used to do this all the time, which I haven't done this for a while. Sometimes somebody says something, and actually we had a lecture yesterday that looked at the Battle of Pileth, when Owen Glyndwr's army was fighting Edmund Mortimer, whose army was twice the size of his. And within Edmund Mortimer's ranks, there were Welsh bowmen that turned against the Normans. And there's several battles in the campaign of Edward I in Scotland that the similar thing happens. Now, the point is, if Arminius is leading Roman auxiliaries against Rome, why can't there be auxiliaries within the legionary ranks that actually just turn against the Romans and turn against their paymasters? And that would make perfect sense, because at the end of the day, you know, if you've got friends out there, you could, you know, those friends are going to know you're there, and you can actually turn against your ex-colleagues. And that is an amazing point. That's a really good point. It's been done before. It's been done before many times in history. And that's a good point. That's great. Keith, anything to say about that before we finish?
Not really. It's just interesting point to speculate that if the Romans hadn't been defeated and they'd gone on to civilize, as they would call it, the whole of Germany, we might not have then have had Angles, Saxons, and Jutes invading Britain 500 years later.
We wouldn't have had the Norman conquest or anything, and all those other things. Right. What I'm going to say is thank you very much for joining me today. Are you all joining us next week?
Yes.
Yeah, we'll still be here.
Good. Have you all enjoyed it today?
Yeah.
Oh, rubbish.
Andrew, Rosamond, I want a quick chat, so nobody's got anything else to say. I'm going to say good night, goodbye to Jim. See you next week. Keith, Chris, Jane, Goff, Karen, Ellen, and Sue. I'll see you next week.
Cheers.
Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, Carl.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Oi.
La, la.
Are you in Barry tomorrow?
What's that?
Are you in Barry tomorrow?
I am not in Barry tomorrow, but Jim,
Okay.
if you're talking about eggs, we've got some duck eggs if you want them.
No, I'm going to Barry tomorrow to do something. I just wondered if you were there, but if not, it doesn't matter.
No, Jim, contact me by email when you're next there, and I'll let you know if I'm going to be there or not. Okay.
Okay. Cheers.
Take care, Jim. Bye.
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 Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Ellen did really well getting on that. It's good. It's good. So, right, what are you up to, Ellen?
I'm doing more gardening. I'm planting out loads of vegetables and things. And I've also got builders doing my outside wall, which was falling down, as you know. So I just had to pop out and see one just now.
Yeah, with a cup of tea, and I'm sure he's got his top off.
I should be so lucky.
You could always pay him a little bit more if you know.
Well, I was going to say the price I'm paying them should have been more than just the top.
On that note, Ellen, I'm yes, I'm gonna have a quick chat with Andrea. So where are we? And Roz. So right, okay then. What was I going to say? Roz and you know, Ellen and Goff are still sorting themselves out. I'm not going to kick them out.
Right.
Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Right. I think Goth is gone. Hang on a minute. Goth, I'm going to remove you from the group. Nothing personal, but I will see you on Saturday, hopefully. Goth has been removed. Right. Okay. Oh, you can't even remove. Anyway, look, guys. You know, Bridgend Way.
Bridgend, yeah.
Yeah. Have we got the ability to put some of the classes on discs to send out to them in the meantime? Is that possible?
In what?
Oh gosh.
Just put just on a writable DVD disc, because it's, yeah, I'm getting some feedback from people in Bridgend that they might find it useful if they could have some of the classes recorded. Is that a good idea?
I'm already covering Llantwit and Barry. So
Yeah. But is it a good idea that we could do that? No, we could do it ourselves. Yeah.
I don't really want to go to Bridgend every week as well.
No, I'm not asking you to, but is that sort of a good idea?
To get the classes on discs was a way
Yeah.
to save. Yeah.
The Bridgend, yeah, because we don't have tablets yet, so.
But Mike, I have one question, Carl.
Go on.
I'm a bit concerned that everybody's picture and involvement in the Zoom discussions is going out on YouTube and going out on this in every other format. They've actually got the people going out on it, and whether
point, isn't it? Yeah.
That they are being put on, because I was quite stunned when I saw my grandson on it.
Right. Okay. No, that's a good point. I will try and rectify that, because obviously it's still. Yeah, that's not been raised at this stage, but yeah, I will try.
I didn't realise that our pictures were being put up on YouTube, and I'm sure everyone else hasn't either.
Right.
No, I didn't realise. I knew that the lectures are being recorded.
Yeah.
But I didn't realise that, say like I just said that question, that would be going out with my face.
Yeah.